Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley from Atlassian. I am thrilled to be appearing at FINITE Fest today. We're going to be talking about thought leadership and influencer marketing. So I want to start with a little bit of a question for us, kind of a pop quiz. So I'm going to show you a couple of posts, one from a profile that has about 2,300 followers, and another from a profile that has about 478,000 followers. So profile one is the small profile, profile two is the large profile. So when I show you these posts, I want you to think which post gets more reach, small profile number one, large profile number two, and then which post is going to get more engagement. So again, profile number one is our small one, profile number two is our large one. Are we ready to see the posts? So here we go. Full disclosure, small profile number one is from my personal profile. And at the time, I had about 2,300 followers. And I posted about going back into the office for the first time post-pandemic. And it was kind of awkward. I was like, man, I'm kind of the only person. And I have some mixed feelings about this. And that post actually performed really well. And so my company decided that they wanted to post it from the company page, which at the time had about 478,000 followers. So which of these posts got more reach and which one got more engagement? Let's take a look. So using Shield Analytics on the top there, let's take a look at my personal stats. I got over 66,000 impressions, 1,600 reactions, and 60 comments. And using the native platform, this is how the post performed from the company page. Only 33,000 impressions, 140 reactions, 20 comments. So my personal post outperformed on every single metric. And I had 100 times less followers than the company page. So why did this happen? Well, there's a couple of reasons, but the biggest one is that people trust people like themselves. So the 2021 Edelman Trust Barometer found that people trust people like themselves, including technical experts, more than they trust more formal markers of authority. So more than CEOs, more than religious organizations, more than government organizations. They want to hear from people. They don't want to hear from a faceless brand. And so what we start to see is that we can turn our employees into the thought leaders and the influencers from our company. And in some cases, even with a much smaller profile, their content can outperform the company page. So today, I want to introduce a thought leadership framework that you can use to help build your employees into thought leaders. So some of the goals with using the framework. First, assess our current efforts. So how is the company doing on thought leadership, and how are employees doing sharing thought leadership and building personal profiles? Next, we want to create a consistent and holistic plan. This is not just a scattershot thing. This is not just, I don't know, we'll have an employee advocacy program and I don't know, people will share on social. No, how are we going to build this as a functional part of our holistic marketing strategy? Next, we want to build a pipeline to scale. So how many companies have one person, maybe two people, it's a founder or C-suite exec that are out there as the thought leaders of the company? What happens if they leave or get sick or go on vacation? So we have to have a pipeline to scale so that we've created a bench of credible spokespeople. And finally, we want to provide actionable recommendations. So when we do see that someone is starting to build a profile, or we do see that someone has strong ideas, what do we do to help them scale? That's how we're creating that consistent plan. We're creating that pipeline to scale by providing actionable recommendations. Now, before we dive into the framework, I want to frame the framework. So this is confined to knowledge workers. It's not about celebrities, entertainers, musicians, or just being famous. It has to be somebody who's working in a business context. Next, you need to have a thought. So if we look at the definition of thought leadership, it's literally in the name. You have to have thoughts. So you have to be making improvements. You have to be executing in novel ways. Otherwise, iterating and introducing something new or original. And finally, being good at your job does not make you a thought leader. There are plenty of smart, capable people who produce great results for their personal bank account or just their team or their company. But leadership is about having external influence. Again, thought, you have to have thoughts. Leadership, people have to be able to follow you. So you have to be out there sharing. You can't just be iterating and keeping it all to yourself. So with that, let's look at the pillars. First is credibility. Do people believe you when you say things? Do they think that you know what you're talking about? Next, have a strong profile. So this is the piece where a lot of people think, oh, I need to be famous. I need to have a lot of followers. People have to know who I am. Next is being prolific. Are you out there creating a lot of content, sharing a lot of content? Are you on multiple platforms? Do you share multiple different asset types, long form, short form? Are you in multiple places? Are you being prolific, not only with the content you create, but with your ideas? And finally, you have to have strong depth of ideas. Remember, being good at your job, just keeping all of these things to yourself isn't going to help you build that credibility and profile. And so having strong depth of ideas is that new and interesting content that you're adding to the conversation. Now, this is the profile for a lot of executives, founders, C-suite, senior leadership folks. They have high credibility. They're really good at their jobs. They probably have a fancy title, and they may even have a decent profile because they've probably been in the industry for a long time. So people kind of know who they are, maybe people they've worked with in the past, or maybe a friend of a friend. But in a lot of cases, they're not prolific and they don't have strong depth of ideas. Now, I know what you're thinking. They're super smart. They're running the company. Exactly. They're too busy to take the time to codify those ideas to then share them. And so that's why they're low on being prolific and having depth of ideas. This is your classic too busy executive to be able to help contribute to thought leadership initiatives. Now, this is what the profile looks like for a lot of smart, capable practitioners. They're actually very prolific. They're iterating, they're coming up with new things, they're codifying new tactics and new strategies. And in a lot of cases, they may actually be sharing, but nobody's really listening. Maybe they don't have that strong credibility because they don't have a fancy title or the company is not helping to amplify their ideas. And because of that, they also don't have a strong profile. They haven't drawn a big audience or built a big audience. And in some cases, these people are actually starting to move into that strategic layer of the pillar. It's not just tactics and execution. It can be starting to iterate on processes or solving problems outside of their specific discipline. Now, I would suggest that you can be an effective thought leader for your organization with a profile that looks like this. You don't have to get to the top of every single pillar. Sometimes that can be overwhelming. If I were to say, you have to be the most expert, you have to have the biggest profile, you have to be sharing all the time, you have to be a visionary, pioneering new methods. That's a really tall order for most people. So I would suggest that you can be a strong thought leader if you are unquestioned in terms of your knowledge of the source material. You have strong credibility. You have field level or regional level profile. More people know you than you know, but you don't have to be getting on stages with thousands of people in the audience. I would say that you do need to be sharing often on multiple platforms in multiple asset types. And in terms of ideas, you can be strong in both tactical or moving into that strategic depth, starting to share ideas in a way that other people can learn from them and execute them in different disciplines or adjacent industries. So how do you know if you're moving up in each pillar? So I've created some different proof points and tactics to improve from a credibility standpoint. How often are people saying, hey, did you just come up with this? Or can you cite your sources versus you being the person that they cite? So there's multiple ways to build authority. There's positional. So for example, having a big title, if you've got a vice president title or a founder title, being a practitioner with repeatable results. So this could be shown from years of experience or number of people that you've helped. And it can be formal credentials. So if you've got a PhD or a specific certification, but it's also about regularly sharing your point of view on developments and helping to create original research to share. Next, your profile. So I put in a couple of numbers that tend to make sense for a B2B audience, but take a look at your specific industry and your specific audience to understand what it means to have a big profile. So if you've got less than 1,000 followers, you're not really reaching that many people. More than 5,000 followers on a platform, and you're starting to build that bigger audience. So some tactics. You can start by sharing on owned personal and company channels. So again, get started on personal LinkedIn, start sharing on your company blog. And then you can start to republish on adjacent channels where you have strong influence and ownership. You can also start to connect with other people who are a step or two ahead of you in building that bigger profile so that you can amplify your name, your content, and your profile. In terms of being prolific, these are some target areas to start creating content. So if you're only creating a couple of pieces of content per year, maybe one podcast or one blog post, you're not being very prolific. If you look at the greatest thinkers, you'll see that they're sharing all the time, 2 or 3 pieces of content per month, multiple different pieces of content in different places. So podcasts, speaking engagements, social media, blogs, long form, short form, live, audio, recorded, video. So where are you sharing? And you can pitch and accept speaking engagements that are appropriate to your level. You can pitch and accept long form written opportunities at places that are appropriate for your level. And finally, building depth of ideas. So things like publishing in academic journals or participating in creating original research. Now, one thing to call out here is that companies have to give people time to codify their ideas. I see this a lot. You did an awesome thing. Awesome. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. But when do you take the time to step back and write it down? Talk about the process that you went through to come up with those results. Talk about challenges along the way. What would you have done differently? How would you instruct other people to keep improving on your ideas? That's how you get to depth of ideas. And then again, all of those pieces of content contribute to you being prolific, building that credibility, and building those profiles. Now, I get a lot of questions. What's the difference between an influencer and a thought leader? And I have a couple of thoughts on that. They're not the same thing. So influencers tend to be strong on having a profile and being prolific. They're out there speaking a lot, and they may have a lot of followers. This is if you think about somebody being the face of a brand or a product. And you can hire people. So you go out, you find somebody that's already got a massive following, and you say, hey, we want you to speak on behalf of the brand. Now, the problem with that is that they're usually weaker on credibility and depth of ideas. They've built this huge following. Maybe they're very attractive, or maybe they say things in an interesting way, but they're not necessarily saying something new. And so they get this halo of usually trying to sell something. Again, think about putting celebrities on a Wheaties box. Really? The Wheaties are what made Michael Jordan amazing, or the Wheaties are what made Katie Ledecky swim the fastest. Of course not. You know it's not the Wheaties. It's all of the training and all of that crafting it. But you know they're trying to sell you something. So instead, this is why I suggest helping to build your employees into thought leaders, because they're strong in all pillars. They have that credibility. They're able to build that profile. They're driving the industry forward and educating the market. It doesn't feel like you're selling something when you're in thought leadership, because you're not. You're educating, you're adding to the conversation, you're shaping how people think about problems and solutions. And what I would say is that all content should be quality content. So frequently when companies say we need thought leadership content, they're actually using that as a proxy for quality. Oh, yes. Sales enablement, that's sales content. Ah, yes, the website, that's buying content. We don't want to create that. No, you should be creating quality content for both buy intent and learn intent content. All of it should be learn intent and buy intent content, right? It should all be quality. If you want to come over here and learn, great, stay right here. You want to come over here and buy, great. That should be a frictionless experience. So don't mistake thought leadership for quality. You have to have quality content, whether it's buy intent or learn intent. So how do you do that? You have to have the tools and support in place. So first, there's 2 different ways to help people become thought leaders. First is building a narrative. So this is taking something that the company cares about. For example, at Atlassian, agile methodology, or how to build a strong engineering organization. And you build that narrative in a way that anyone can take it and run with it. They can add their own personal stories, they can add their own experience, but the narrative at its core stays the same. Alternatively, you can build a person. So let's say you already have someone who's kind of an influencer. They have a big following. A lot of people trust them. How do you lend that additional credibility and amplification to them so that they continue to grow in a way that helps them and the company? Now, one way or the other is not necessarily the right way. There's not a better way. And often these two approaches work together in tandem, helping to shape that narrative in a way that somebody with a big following can help the company, or working together to build a narrative in a way that multiple people can see themselves and align to it with credibility for their audience. Next, you have to build the narratives. And I suggest doing this at 3 different depths: conceptual, strategic, and tactical. So at the conceptual level, these are your overarching themes. I'd say maybe 3 up to 5, but this is not scattershot. You're not going to talk about all the things in all the places. This helps your audience frame up the problem space. It's the what and the why of the idea. Next is the strategic depth. So this helps people frame up the solution space, not just your solution, but the overall solution space. So it talks about the processes, tools, and key knowledge components that must be in place to make that conceptual idea reality. And finally, tactical. This is the nitty-gritty how-to. It's the daily habits, it's the daily interactions, and yes, sometimes the daily usage of the tools to help people make that problem come to life. So how do we solve it? How does the solution work? And so what this does is it gives you a framework for people to add their own experience, but make sure that it stays cohesive and that it has enough depth for them to be able to talk about it for 12, 18, 24 months. So here we've talked about the conceptual depth, so it's theoretical and philosophical in nature. The strategic depth, so the processes, tools, and key knowledge components. And finally, the tactical, it's prescriptive, step-by-step instructions. Next, you need to lay out your outlets and influencers. So when we talk about shaping that conversation, you have to know what conversation is happening. Who else is talking about this? Now, I've always heard it said, there's nothing new under the sun. I have nothing original to say. And that's okay. But you can add your unique point of view to the conversations that are already happening. So I always ask people to create a list of 25 influencers, brands, and outlets to share on social. Now, this is not Harvard Business Review. This is not Fast Company. Everybody reads those publications. Who are the specific accounts, people, brands, and outlets that your target audience is following to have that niche conversation? Next, 10 conferences or podcasts to pitch, and then also 10 publications to pitch. So again, this helps you be prolific. It helps you, once you've codified your ideas, to put them out into the world. Where is your target audience spending their time? That's where you want to start sharing your ideas to drive that conversation forward. And finally, your personal brand. So I hear this a lot when I start working with people. They say, oh, I'll just say whatever you want me to say. I'll just wear whatever you want me to wear. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do that. No, I don't have a right thing for you to do. I'm here to help you find your authentic self. Because if you're wearing a mask or you're repeating a script, people won't trust you. People trust people like themselves. And so you have to be authentic. And so what I ask people to do is walk through this for themselves. Voice and tone. Do I write in long sentences, quippy phrases, sarcastic fragments? Do I curse? Do I curse in person? Do I curse in writing? Again, there's no right answers to these questions, but how you speak starts to inform how people think of you. Clothing. Do I have a signature look? Right? Steve Jobs with his turtleneck. One of our founders frequently wears a trucker hat. I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't wear, but you have to feel comfortable in what you're wearing so that your authenticity shines through. Your full self. Do I share anything and everything, or do I limit it in my personal profile? Do I talk regularly about mistakes and failures, both personal and professional? Do I include my family, my friends, my pets? And I always encourage people to ask these questions and put these in place before they get big. Now, it sounds fun and fine to start talking about your spouse or your kids when you only have a few followers, but what happens when you do start to get on bigger stages? Are they comfortable with you sharing their stories? And finally, accessibility. Do you give out your personal email address? Do you accept all LinkedIn connections? How many coffee dates to pick your brain do you take each month? Again, there's no right answers, but you do need to think about how often you're going to let people into your personal circle once you start to get big. It's easy to manage when you're only getting a couple of connections a week. What if you get thousands of comments or thousands of connections every week? So think about these things in advance and craft this in a way that you feel confident showing up as your authentic self. Next, setting up social. So first thing we do is audit your existing channels and activity. And in my case, because we're focused on B2B SaaS, we frequently start with LinkedIn. So fixing the headshots, immediate gaps. I always see headshots where people are like looking up, or maybe their face is slightly obscured, or the lighting is not good. Make sure that your headshot is accessible. People want to recognize you when they meet you in person. Then we set up a process and training for ongoing engagement. So how often are you able to post on LinkedIn? How often do you tweet? How often are you able to start sharing things on social in a way that feels authentic? Next, we create the foundational elements for speaking gigs. So abstracts and key takeaways. Pretty much every conference is going to ask you for a title, an abstract of around 300 characters, and some key takeaways. What will the audience learn? So don't create these from scratch every time. Using those conceptual and strategic level narratives, translate those into key takeaways and abstracts that you can pitch to multiple places. Once you get accepted, we do content coaching and a slide deck review. So is this going to resonate with your audience? Does it make sense? Does it flow? What does the structure look like? And finally, speaker coaching. How do you show up on stage? Do you have good stage presence? If you're in videos, do you know where to look? Right? If I start looking over to the side, let's say I've got notes, like you kind of don't trust me because why am I looking over there? Instead, here, when I look directly into the camera, we can make that one-to-one connection. So speaker coaching is not just about what you say, it's about how you say it in different mediums. Now, this slide is intentionally overwhelming. I want to talk about the scope of ownership, because if you're in a big company, you might have a comms team and an editorial team and an admin team and social media. You've got a bunch of people who can help make you look good. But I want to focus in on the individual, because your employees, whether that's senior executives all the way down to interns, they have to take ownership of the message. They have to be willing to put themselves out there. And if they're too busy, if they can't get in a room and give you some ideas, if they can't codify their thoughts, if they're not willing to engage on social media, then they don't want to be thought leaders. And so I would encourage you to really focus in on empowering the individuals, not just saying, oh, we're going to focus on these one or two and ghostwrite content for them. No, you have to think about empowering and building trust at scale. So let's take a look at a couple of real world examples. How do you get started with this? First, start with your bio. So my bio says marketer, writer, speaker by day, singer, actor, and fitness fiend by night. But it could just as easily have said, Ashley Faus is a seasoned marketing professional. She works at Atlassian and holds an MBA from UT Dallas. Pretty different, right? Now, the first one tells you something about who I am, what I value, and the kind of energy you can expect from me when I show up in writing or on stage. Neither one is right or wrong. You might be more formal. You might be quippy. So I would encourage you to take a pass at your bio. Write it super long, write it super academic, write it super humble, write it super arrogant, write it super short, write it sarcastic, write it with a mix of personal and professional. Which one feels most like you? Now, this exercise can start to give you a sense for the type of voice and tone that you might show up with when you speak or when you write. Next, talk about problems you solve, not just your product that you're selling. So I love this example from my colleague, Philip Braddock. So he, early in the pandemic, was responsible for creating our travel policies. When things first started becoming restricted, we had to quickly figure out, what are we going to do about business travel? So he then posted those policies internally and then leveraged that into a speaking engagement on a panel about travel policies. He also turned that into a guide for other organizations to say, how might you lead in terms of a crisis? Now, this went beyond just the travel policies. This looked overall at the culture, teamwork, and compensation to figure out the best way to respond during a crisis. Next, pair two or more people. So you can see here, me and my colleague, Molly Hellerman, are talking about micro feedback. And this gave her something to share on LinkedIn. So this is interesting. Molly has a much bigger title than I have. She's a global vice president. So big title, but she didn't really post very often on LinkedIn. Now I'm quite prolific. And so by pairing the two of us together, we're starting to lend each other a halo of credibility and posting. So we co-wrote this article on the Atlassian blog and then started to post that on LinkedIn. We were also able to turn this into a speaking engagement for multiple different platforms. And so by pairing the two of us together, we both go further than we could alone. Next, start with friendly channels. So when we started to build up my colleague in engineering, Steve Deasy, we started by sharing something on owned and partner platforms. So we have a strategic partnership with InVision. And so he was easily able to go on their podcast to talk about how designers and engineers unite. We also used our personal blog, our professional blog on LinkedIn we go back. We also were able to use our business blog called Work Life. So he talked about 3 research-backed principles to help scale your engineering organization. And those two things work together. And then we repurposed that content into multiple assets. So the basis of that content became a talk for San Francisco Developer Week. So he was able to deliver that as a keynote presentation. He then shared that on LinkedIn to promote the presentation, and then also shared that as an article on LinkedIn. And so they're all connected. So I recommend extending the shelf life of your content by breaking it into multiple asset types. Never create one-off content. It needs to work in multiple places. Now, that's not to say you just blast it everywhere, right? We created this as a slide deck. We created this as a blog post, and then we used multiple pieces in different formats for him to share on LinkedIn. Then you need to create a symbiotic relationship. So how many of you have seen 100 posts on LinkedIn saying, we're hiring, we're hiring, we're hiring, we're trying to promote all of these different positions? And so I posted something similar on my personal profile talking about opportunities for new grads. And it got over 30,000 views in just 24 hours. But I didn't do this on my own. Here's how the post was performing. Again, this is via Shield Analytics. And it was growing at kind of a normal pace for me at about 2,900 impressions. But look what happened when the Atlassian page with over 500,000 followers engaged. It doubled the engagement and the views in an hour. And so when we think about how company pages should behave, they need to be amplifying those personal profiles. It's not company page exists over here and employee profiles exist over here. They should work together in a symbiotic relationship so that both pages and profiles grow. So here's what I would say. Look to your employees for thought leadership and influence. People trust people like themselves. You don't necessarily need to go hire somebody that already has a massive following. You don't need to force all of your employees to amplify just the company content. Instead, you need to baseline them with the framework, and then you need to help them improve across all 4 pillars. Your employees are the key to building that thought leadership and that influence for your product, for your company, to attract sales, to attract prospects, to attract talent, and to attract partners. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about thought leadership and influencer marketing, and I hope you enjoy the rest of FINITE Fest.